we really should be moving at the speed of learning. We shouldn't just be moving at the speed of the deal or the speed that we want to, keep this, this train rolling along the tracks.
Welcome to Multifamily Insights. I'm your host, John Casman, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. If you're enjoying this show, do me one little favor and leave us that rating and review. It helps more people find this show, but also gives us some feedback so we can make this work harder for your investing goals. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. We've got a great show today. We're going to be talking to Kyle Pearce. Now, Kyle Pearce is one of three teachers who we consider to be invested teachers. Now, these three teachers began investing back in 2011 in real estate, and slowly but surely, they grew their portfolio to 31 doors, primarily using a buy and hold strategy. They are based in U.S. markets and also in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. Let's welcome to the show, Mr. Kyle Pearce. They say you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you want to grow as a multifamily investor, you have to spend more time with other multifamily investors. And an easy way to do that is to join our apartment investing mastermind group today. Just go to casmancapital.com and click on the mastermind button. Now, as a part of this group, you'll get access to expert trainings, group coaching calls, industry news and updates, as well as all of our webinars and workshops, including our 3-hour workshop on raising capital. Again, if you want to be around other multifamily investors that can help you scale your portfolio today and grow your network, make sure you're a part of the Apartment Investing Mastermind. Just go to casmancapital.com and click on the Mastermind button today. Ike
Hey,
Mutabana is the CEO of 110 Equity, owning and operating multifamily commercial real estate assets. Currently, Ike's portfolio includes over 1,300 multifamily units, representing over $270 million in assets under management. Let's welcome to the show, Ike Mutabana.
Hey there, John. Thanks so much for having me today.
Absolutely. Hey, Kyle. So you're one of 3 invested teachers. So I know you got a couple buddies that you work with here, but I went over your bio at a very high level. Why don't you take 2 minutes and fill in some of those gaps?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the three of us, I mean, we did not begin this journey together, but we all were teaching way back when this journey
Mm,
began. And individually, we sort of had our own little paths. And, on our podcast, Invested Teacher, we often talk about sort of our different ways that we've sort of come together. And the three of us have obviously one thing that was in common amongst all of us, and that's that we were in teaching. Jon Orr is one of the invested teachers. He was a math teacher just like me. And Matt Bigley actually was like a history teacher and then turned into a guidance teacher. And, so he was sort of in a different aspect of the teaching world. But all of us knew that we wanted to do something a little bit more. So we all began the journey kind of on our own. Matt was flipping properties with his wife. His wife is the Leslie Style on Instagram. Maybe some listeners even know of the amazing work she does. They were, buying homes, making them beautiful, and then living in them, and then sort of doing it again at another house and kind of working their way through. For me, I took advantage of the U.S. market. And when we came out of the financial crisis, that's when I was getting into real estate and the interest there. And I just thought to myself, oh my gosh, if I'm ever going to do this, now is the time. I'll argue and say it was probably 2 years before I got in was the right time, but ultimately I knew I had to do something, so I jumped in. And then there's John, the third invested teacher, who was the typical teacher. I've got a pension, I love my job, and everything's going to be a-okay. So he sort of joined well later in this journey. So we kind of, banter back and forth on our show about sort of our own experiences. And ultimately, when we get feedback from listeners, oftentimes they can see themselves in at least one of us. And that's really the goal is, we want to bring more people into the space, not necessarily teachers, but ultimately people that are like us who are doing their job. Maybe they love their job, maybe you hate your job, but ultimately at the end wanted to do something more than the 9 to 5. And yeah, that's sort of how our journey began at a still high level, but a good overview for you anyway.
So 3 guys really getting into this real estate investing space with different approaches, different lenses. How did you all kind of come together? Or did you guys meet at a networking event? Or I'm curious to hear how you all kind of came together and realized you're on the same journey.
Yeah. For me and Matt, Matt was a teacher in my school, and we were both kind of doing our own thing. As I had mentioned, I was picking up a couple properties. I had one in Florida. Use a line of credit, which was really scary to me. I was, that guy that was paying down his mortgage, and accelerating that payment. I was like, I'm gonna have this house paid off in 11 years, and that was like a big goal of mine. And then I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and started realizing I'm like, oh my God, I'm the poor dad. Like that is who I am. I've got a good job, I've got a pension, I've got, all of those things. And I'm just building up all this dead equity. So I went, bought my first property down there. I bought a second property in Arizona. Matt was doing the flips, like I had said, but just doing one at a time, just sort of, like fixing, improving, buying the next one, doing the same in the next place. And they were just kind of doing their own thing as well. And, a property locally came up, and, we were just chatting. And I remember talking to Matt, and it was like when we first recognized, we didn't know that we were both doing our own little real estate thing. We kind of dug a little deeper, and, we both said, like, I'd love to scale up more, but I don't know, like I'm a little nervous. Like I don't know if I want to do that by myself. And I said, there's this like these 6 units that are available, and it's just down the road from me. And he goes, was that on Reno Line? And I'm like, yeah, that's the one. He's like, I've been watching that one too. It was a private sale. And we sort of said, hey, like, why don't we go in on this together, and like let's do this and let's learn from it, so we could almost create a bit of a mentorship for both of us, a support system, to feel good, to be able to run deals by each other, talk them out, try to look for blind spots. And that's sort of how we began the process. We have a holding corp that we co-own together, and then John joined us more or less like right before the pandemic, when he sort of came around. Him and I were doing all kinds of math, side hustle stuff online, and I said, hey, like, what are you doing for investing? And he sort of said, like, pension, like that was it. And we offered him in on a deal and said, hey, why don't you jump in on this first one, be a JV, come in, bring the money, we'll do the rest, we'll explain it all to you as you go. And he was like, wow, that's like genius. So he hopped in, and he hasn't looked back since. So now he's fully in and just loving it, as well as our third invested teacher.
Man, I love that, right? So just to break that down, right? The you and Matt kind of working together, doing your own things kind of independently, having some conversations maybe in the hallways or at that lunch table, and realize, hey, we've got a lot more in common than we think. We're both looking to scale. We're both, maybe interested in the 6th unit. Why don't we partner up? That way we can help each other and we can go take this thing down. John
Mm-hmm.
kind of came around a little bit later in the process, and started as kind of that passive investor in this JV type deal, but you were able to build and go from there. I think a couple things that I take away is one, there are probably people in our circles who are investing today, and maybe they have a different strategy than what we have, but we know they're interested in real estate because they're
Mm-hmm.
investing. It might be worthwhile to talk to them, learn more about them. What are you trying to accomplish with investing? Have you thought about scaling? Have you thought about multifamily or larger apartments? And see if you can build some rapport. I mean, at a minimum, you have a like-minded person and you can get to know a little bit of on a deeper level. But it could potentially turn into a partnership, or it could turn into more. So it's worth
Mm-hmm.
having those conversations with these people that you spend all day with anyway. And the other part is, and I'm interested to hear this, is your third partner, really was focused on the pension, right? Doing more of kind of what we're all taught, right? Go to college, get a good job, work that job, get your 401k, your pension, your retirement plan, and you should be set. And you and I know that that's not necessarily the case. And that may have been the path that he was on until he kind of learned more about what you all were doing. And now he's fully vested in saying, hey, you know what, this is actually a great strategy. For those individuals who are either maybe for themselves or people close to them who are maybe thinking about it the same way your partner John was thinking about it, right? I've got this pension, I've got this retirement plan. Talk to me about why they should seriously consider taking more control over their investments as opposed to simply relying on that 401k or that pension plan.
Well, you said a lot there, and I 100% agree. I think one thing that I think is really important and why you want to be reaching out to other people. So it's kind of two pieces here. I'll answer the last question in a second, but you know what I think we recognized when we came together. I think a lot of people, like human nature, is that if there's, let's say, a deal out there, and you're like, wow, this might be a great opportunity. The first thought is I want to take it down myself. But the problem is, like, oftentimes fear gets in the way, right? Or maybe ignorance gets in the way, or any of these other factors. And the reality is that, like, we live in an abundant world. And as soon as you get into that mindset and you realize, like, there are so many possible deals out there that are going to come your way. And when you become better at what you're doing and more confident in what you're doing, which can be done faster with a team, right? With different perspectives, then you're going to be doing a great job, and you're going to feel really good about the work you do. Now, why
And
I think
Kyle,
people,
Kyle,
yeah,
real quick,
sorry, go for it.
I think that's such a great point. And to elaborate, when you say fear, it's not necessarily that you're just scared. It's just sometimes we recognize the very clear obstacles. For instance, I don't have enough money to do this deal.
Totally.
And sometimes those obstacles shut us down from even starting. And the reality is when you approach with an abundant mindset, you can start to overcome those obstacles. But when you look
100%.
at it and just realize, well, I've never done it before, or I don't have the money, or whatever other objection you have, it shuts you down from even considering what the next logical step may be. And that stops you in your tracks from even getting to the point to consider whether or not it's an opportunity. So I think that fear and that limiting belief is so important to recognize, but also to recognize that, it's just an obstacle. And
Mhm.
everyone has found ways to overcome those obstacles. So let's not try to make it as big. It's just an obstacle that needs to be worked through, just like any other challenge in life.
Totally. And like, if you think about why masterminds work, right? Or coaching works, or mentorship of any type, like why it actually works. So, being in education, we've done a ton of learning about the psychology of coaching, mentorship, all of those pieces. And the reality is that what might seem like a massive obstacle to you by yourself sometimes is like just a tiny speed bump that can be cleared up in like a 10-minute conversation with someone else, right? Like just a different perspective. All of a sudden, it's like it opens the door to like the cheat code to getting past that hurdle. And if you just like dwell on it yourself and you just sort of go like, I'll eventually figure it out, you're just extending that timeline. The chances are you're not going to spend the time necessary to think deeply enough to get over that hurdle. Whereas hopping on the call with someone like yourself, or hopping on, I call Matt all the time, and we talk through things, and it's like you have these epiphanies. Like that's truly like where epiphanies come from. They very rarely happen on your own. Happens when you're listening to a podcast like this one, or it happens when you're talking with a good friend, or someone asks you the right question that you never thought to ask yourself. All of a sudden, you're now like over that hurdle. It's almost like it never even existed. You probably won't even remember that that was a hurdle for you because you had that support system in line, which is, to me, something I value the most about this team. And, anyone who's sitting back and kind of doing this alone, yeah, just like you said, like reach out to other people, see who's interested. You can't force someone to be interested. You can't sort of like, make it happen. But being that we were all teachers and we still are teachers, that's what made it so fun to try to bring Jon into this world. Was like when you see them have an epiphany, like that's why teachers do what they do, right? Like they want that for kids, but they want it for anyone. They want it for adults. So when I handed over like Rich Dad Poor Dad to Jon, because I knew, I'm like, he's the poor dad too, and his dad was a teacher, and he had that mindset too, and still lives a great life, like he can provide for his family. But it was just like, hey, is that what you want, or do you want something else? And he sort of like had that light bulb go off. So it's, to me, it's all about epiphanies. It's all about people sort of, coming to recognize that, like, oh, maybe there's something different, and I want to learn a little bit more about that.
I love everything you just said there, because when we understand how to help people, it makes life so much easier for us. And,
Hmm.
you talked about, teaching and educating, John and other people. And I just wrote down a couple notes. And one is that, there's this notion of when we're faced with these obstacles, asking, how can I? If you can ask,
Mhm.
how can I do this? That starts to get your mind flowing in the right direction creatively. An even better question than how can I is who can help, right? Who
Totally.
who do I know that has done this, or who do I know that can solve this or help me think about this in the right way? So asking better questions opens up the doors to way better possibilities. So I love the point you just made. The other thing I'm picking up is like, you three teachers came together. There's obviously a passion in teaching. You mentioned John is really a third generation teacher. So having that background, there's clearly a purpose that's tied there. And I think you found where that intersection is between real estate investing and education and helping other people with that passion meeting purpose. Talk to us a little bit about that part of it where, the education is there, but also the financial investment component of it and why that's so important for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, honestly, everything you do really comes down to, I'm going to say it's like lifelong learning, right? And, again, from the education sector going in and you're trying to make students passionate about whatever the subject area. For me, it was mathematics. I ironically, throughout my journey, I was that kid who was considered a good math student. I realized later when I failed a course in university, I just memorized it all, and I actually didn't really know anything about math. But that was learning, right? Like at the time, I didn't feel good about it, and then I learned. I'm like, holy smokes, there's so much more to this. And if I want to help more kids, I'm gonna have to think about it differently because not every kid is going to be like me who could just memorize their way through. So the same is true here. Like when we're talking about investing, when we're talking about partnering or joint ventures, or whether it's multifamily deals or maybe raising capital, the reality is there's a ton of learning to be done. So not only for us as, maybe the people that might be bringing a deal to someone, but you also have to be very, very patient in that the person that you're working with is going to be coming in at a very different level. So I picture it just like those students who'd come into my classroom. I could teach the lesson that I taught every single year without changing or modifying or differentiating it. And maybe I hit 30% of the kids, and 30% of the kids understand what I'm talking about. Or I have to actually like do a needs analysis and I have to go, hey, where are these people? John, if you're coming into the deal, I have to figure out like who is John? How, like what skills does he bring to the table? What does he already know? And then what can we do to help bring John to a place where he has those epiphanies so he goes, holy smokes, like a JV makes perfect sense, right? Or maybe it doesn't for John because John already has all of the skills that he needs in order to do this thing on his own. So maybe it's just maybe a bit of mentorship. Hey, let's do a mentorship program with John and we'll get you going so that you can get that first deal going. So ultimately, for me, I think the beauty of doing investing, whether it's real estate, whether it's in any of these industries, be it you're a realtor, be it you're a financial advisor, an insurance agent, whatever you're doing out there, ultimately it all comes down to relationships, figuring out what people know and what they bring to the table, and then what can you do to help support them and getting them further along the journey without sounding like you're just giving advice, right? Like you're asking the right questions so that they land on the right answers versus it being, hey, John, here's the, 10-step program, just do this and everything will be okay, right? Because you didn't get an epiphany through that. It's got to be questioning, it's got to be working with that person, it's got to be understanding who they are and where they're at in order to help nudge them a little bit further along that journey.
I appreciate the context of how you describe the way you teach because you mentioned like the epiphany, and part of what you're getting at is the person has to take ownership of that journey, that experience themselves. You can tell them the answer all day long, but if they haven't internalized that or have taken ownership of that, it really won't settle. Like you can tell people all day long, hey, invest in these kind of properties, here's the returns
Mhm.
you can make. But if they don't believe it or see how it can really help them or really buy into it, it's not going to make a difference. And that education part is so key. I mean, I wrote down focus on education and the actual learning, not necessarily on the content and just the words you want to say. So, you also talked about like understanding where that person is coming from. What are their experiences? What's their knowledge level of the situation? And what solutions do they actually need? So it's not just saying, hey,
Mhm.
again, you should invest in this deal. It's, you know what? maybe that's not right for you. Maybe you're at a place where you really need to understand how real estate as a whole can help you achieve some of your financial goals. And I always tell people that in order for someone to invest in a deal with you, they have to believe first and foremost in real estate as a financial vehicle to help them achieve their own financial goals. If they don't believe in
100%.
real
Yeah.
estate, I could love you, right? But if I don't believe in real estate for whatever reason, maybe someone in my family lost money in real estate or I saw somebody lose a house, they don't have that connection to real estate as a vehicle. They see it as a
Mhm.
risk, right? It's a risky bet. But you and I probably look at it as, hey, this is one of the most powerful wealth generation, wealth creation tools available for the everyday person. So they don't have that mindset. So you have to start with helping them learn, about real estate and maybe unraveling some of that baggage that they may have. And after they kind of learn that, or they decide that real estate can help them, now they can start to learn a little bit more about what you do and the deals you have and some of those kind of things. So that education is so key, and I think I love the way you talked about just the depth of it because it's not just telling people
Mhm.
something; it's actually helping them really understand. And that's the big difference between again good teachers and mediocre teachers is you can have the same subject and lesson plan, but the really good teachers make sure they understand how people learn and how they receive messages and figure out a way to actually make that connection so those messages stick. Just build on that a little bit more, man. What are some things you have found that have really helped other people understand the benefit of real estate investing or partnerships with you or your team and just really making the difference for them to really make an impact on their own family's financial future.
For sure. The word that comes to mind as you were describing that was ownership, right? Like, again, I'm going to be, a little cheesy here and go back all the way to education and math and, math class. And, those people who are listening, like, everyone who's listening, I'm going to guess, went to some sort of school, and they learned some math at some point. I don't care what country you're from, some way, somehow it happened. And when you think about your own experience, there are people who feel confident in mathematics. There are some people who got through math, but they're like, I don't actually know what I'm doing, but I got through. And then there's other people who knew that, they had a negative relationship with math at a really early age. The reality is that only those who are confident, who are the people who own the mathematics, who actually understand it, are able to take that and then do something meaningful with it. Now, I would argue that the same is true here when it comes to investing. You talked about like people have to believe in real estate, let's say, if you're going to come into a real estate deal. And, the thing that popped into my mind as you were describing that was, if a partner comes in, or maybe it's a family member, or maybe it's a friend, it doesn't matter who they are. It could be a stranger all the way to like a spouse. If they're not clear on what it is they're doing or why they're doing it. So once again, if I'm not sure why I'm dropping this number in the long division formula and doing this next step in that formula, you're not going to feel like you own that formula, which means you're not going to be flexible to use that formula. And guess what? When something goes wrong, when you forget the next step in long division or, whatever it is that you're doing, when you forget that step, it becomes a blame game. It becomes like, you told me, John, that the next step was this, and it didn't work for me. Instead of empowering you to be a problem solver, empowering you to understand what it is that you're actually doing so that you can use your own thinking, your own problem solving skills, critical thinking skills to get you out of it, to deal with it, and then figure out what is your next step from there. Because like you had mentioned, I've heard you say it on the podcast before, and many of your guests have said this before, that hey, mistakes do happen along the way, and it's called learning. And then from there you learn, and then you try to do better the next time. Well, if you come into a deal and you own it, and you're going like, I know why I'm doing this, I know why I'm, becoming a joint venture partner with this group over here, or I know why I'm taking down this deal by myself. Then if things don't go exactly the way you thought they were going to go, you're going to be able to take the ownership to go, okay, I thought this. Here's where that didn't work, right? Maybe it's a fluke. Maybe it was because I missed something. Whatever the reason is, you take responsibility for it, that ownership, so that you can then do something else. But if you go into it blind and you're just trusting, hey, I'm just trusting John because he's got a podcast and he has great success, And then that one deal just doesn't turn out exactly the way you thought it would. You get those fingers pointing back at you. And the reality was, hey, maybe we moved a little bit too fast on that. Like maybe you weren't ready to get into the deal. Of course, we want to move on deals, but the reality is that just like in school, we really should be moving at the speed of learning. We shouldn't just be moving at the speed of the deal or the speed that we want to, keep this, this train rolling along the tracks, right? So again, goes back to knowing the people, making sure they're feeling confident. You don't want to feel like it's, something you're selling someone, right? I mean, you are selling an idea, but the reality is it's not selling. You're trying to help people, like I said, trying to help people understand why they want to do something so that they have those tools, so that it's not me convincing them this is a good deal. It's them going like, can I get in that deal because it makes sense based on what I now know, understand, and can do in regards to this particular investment.
And Cal, the thing that stands out too is when you talk about them taking ownership of the learning and the process, and it's also recognizing that this is an ever-changing environment, right? I mean, the
Mhm.
economy is always changing. What sellers are looking for always changes. What the competition is will always change. Rules, regulations, all that stuff is kind of a fluid situation. So the more you can actually learn and understand why you're doing something, and then be able to pull different levers and pivot, and hey, you know what? In this situation, here's what we're really looking for. I think that's so key because so many people are looking for just really a simplified direction of investing, and it's like, hey, is this a good deal? And I always tell them it depends. Like, what are your return projections? Like, what are you looking for? What's your goal? Like, some people are fine with the 5% return. Some people, won't do anything if it's not 20%. So it all depends on you and your investing criteria, and it allows you to kind of customize your goals and find deals that match what you're looking for. And I think that that ambiguity can be a challenge for some people, but it can
Mhm.
also be very empowering if you take the time to take that ownership, learn what it is you're looking for, and then slowly start to devise your own principles and your own criteria for the kind of deals you want to do moving forward. I really appreciate the fact that you shared that. You've got a website, investedteacher.com, where I know you've got a lot of information. What can listeners get if they go check out that site?
Oh, we've got a lot of stuff. I think one of the most popular pieces is we call it our ultimate or best list of investment books, which spans real estate, but it also hits on coaching. I talked a lot about mentorship, coaching. So maybe you're thinking to yourself, you're like, hey, like you need to convince your spouse that real estate's a good idea. It's not about convincing them; it's about helping them to land on that idea, right? So it's not about you saying like because of this, because of that, because of that. It's asking the right questions, trying to figure out like what is their hiccup, like what's their holdup, and really trying to ask those questions. So we got coaching books there and mentorship books. We've got sales books there, which like the psychology of selling is just fascinating to us. We even have things about like infinite banking, like the whole life policy, using it as a tool, and we talk about that on the podcast quite a bit. So you can get that book list over on investedteacher.com. We've got a blueprint for getting yourself started and getting to know yourself. I heard that in the last thing you just mentioned there, John. You were kind of describing this idea of like you have to essentially learn who you are as an investor, because you said there's some people it's like they're after 5% and a lot of safety, and then there's other people like, and maybe it's like the bonus appreciation, like hey, like
Mhm.
5%, and then sometimes it's it works out a lot better, great, but I feel really safe. And then other people are like, no, 20 minimum, and maybe there's a little more risk, there's a little bit more skin in the game you got to have in, right? So know yourself. And I think the more you learn through podcasts are my favorite, audiobooks is my second favorite, the better you're going to be. So you can find that over there. Our podcast is on all podcast platforms. And we even have like a deal analyzer available for friends over on the website too. And we're just going to keep building it out as people request more things. We're going to keep pushing it out there because, again, just like any teacher, when students are hungry for learning, we're super excited to do some sharing.
One of my favorite quotes is that when the student is ready, the teacher or the mentor will appear. And I think that's a great sign of, what's available once you've come to the realization that this is something that can help you achieve some of the goals you have, and having that open, open approach, kind of that abundant mindset and figuring out how you can make something happen or who can help you make something happen, as opposed to focusing just on the obstacle. Check out Invested Teacher if you want to learn more. Right now, Cal and I are going to go to our round of insights. Give me a failure or an apparent failure that set you up for later success.
You know what? I think one of the failures, I would consider it a failure. Again, it's every failure is growth. I look at it as not continuing when I was early in that process. Like it was like a holding pattern, got my first couple properties and I sort of was like, I want to just like see what happens here over the next 5 years. So, wait 5 years and you go, holy smokes, I missed all of this opportunity, right? And I think, time is one of those pieces that, not acting when you knew, like I knew deep inside I should have, I could have, and I didn't. I think that's the biggest thing that I've learned about is like always to be ready, always to keep your eyes, ears, and all those senses open to opportunities to continue growing.
Give me the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year.
Ooh, over the last year, I think it would be Becoming Your Own Banker, which is all about infinite banking. You only have to read it about 400 times to fully grasp it, but definitely something that a math geek like me is all over, and we chat about a lot on the podcast.
Give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
Oh, there's so many of them. I mean, Slack is one that we rely on so much in our online math business that we have and in our real estate holding business. But the other one that I think is really key for us is Asana. Asana has really helped us with systems and, keeping ourselves accountable. So yeah, Asana or a task management system like that.
Give me a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals.
Every single day, I get up. I leave the alarm on at 6. I know 6 isn't that awesome. Some people are up at 4:30 and 5. My buddy John is up at 5 o'clock every morning. I do 6. I set the alarm. I get up and I go straight to what, they call a power tower to do some some chin ups, some dips, some leg lifts. First thing I do in the morning, and then I head straight down to my exercise bike, which is under my standing table, which I'm standing at right now. And I do at least an hour on the bike while I'm doing all that meaningless stuff that I just want to get out of the way. So I'm hitting 2 pieces, exercise and maybe some of those things that sort of pile up through the day. I try to just get them done at the same time. So I feel like I'm getting like double the work done for the day.
This is like on the computer?
Yeah. So I've got my computer.
You can type and pedal?
Type and pedal. I'll even sometimes do a Zoom meeting on the bike, and sometimes people just ask me to politely stop because the head bobbing is just kind of distracting to them. But I try to do it, and I want to try to. I used to go for jogs, and I love running, but the problem was it was like listening to a book and running, and then it would be like coming back to do those tasks, and I'm like, I want to get the task done right away. I want to feel like I got that done. And I want to get my exercise done. So this was like a meet in between, and I would never go back after switching to that.
All right. I like that. I like that in theory, I think, more than I would like it in practice, but it's worth trying once. I have a hard time typing and moving at all. So I think trying to pedal might be a challenge for me, but nonetheless, sounds like a really great approach. Let's talk for our first time investor. All right. Give me your number one insight for someone making their first investment.
I would say first investment, just, I would say, again, go back to the time piece, and this is my personal struggle. I think I had, even in buying my first property back in 2011, I picked up those real estate books in 2007, 2008, and it took me that long to kind of pull the trigger. It was like finding that home run. And in reality, it's like, it didn't have to be a home run. Like I could have picked any property and I would have been probably in a very similar situation. So of course, don't just go into it blindly, but also don't hold off trying to find the very best deal that exists on planet Earth, because that's going to push you off. It's going to, distract you from actually beginning the journey. So make sure you know your criteria, make sure you know what it is you want, who you are and who you want to be as an investor, and then go and seek that thing. Don't necessarily go and try to find the perfect thing, because that can keep you searching for years and years.
All right, you are based in Windsor, other side of Detroit, Michigan. So, give me your favorite place to grab a bite to eat.
Oh my gosh, there's so many of them. I'm going to give a hometown favorite for me right now. I mean, Windsor pizza's huge. So anyone, I forgot to ask you about that. I know you said you came over to Windsor. Windsor pizza is well known. So if you're around, get to any Windsor pizza place. But I'm going to give a local place here in my small town of Bell River outside of Windsor called Twigs. Awesome food, great place, and pretty awesome people because, they're kind of like me.
I love it. Well, I don't know if we've been to Windsor's Pizza. I'm sure I probably have had it, but I have to go back and check, I guess, and see. But listen, great information. I really appreciate the way you talked about your journey, kind of aligning with these two other teachers coming together. And the insight for me is like, there are people around us who are doing what we want to do. We got to just be more vocal. You got to share it. You got to
Hmm.
talk to people about it. And there might be some alliances there. And at a minimum, maybe it allows you to strengthen that relationship. But focusing on education and making sure people are actually learning and taking ownership of that information and whatever their learning process is, that's going to be key if you want to get people on board because they have to own that process. They have to make it something that they really want to do because you're not going to convince somebody to invest, at least not in a good way. So they have to
Hmm.
want to invest, and you have to show them why investing or how investing and help them achieve their goals. For anyone who wants to learn more, your website is investedteacher.com. They can check you out there. Kyle, just want to thank you for being a great guest and coming on Multifamily Insights today.
Hey, thanks so much, John, and appreciate having a chat.
Absolutely. Take care. Have a good one.
You too. Bye now.